moment a pause occurs, we reach for light, noise, or movement. We have mistaken constant stimulation for life itself. But what if boredom, the very feeling we run from, is not an absence, but an opening? What if restlessness is the mind's way of knocking on the door of transformation? Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, a circuit that activates only when we are still. It's in this uneasy silence that the mind begins to reorganize itself, not through movement, but through meaning. We live amidst a constant hum. Notifications, headlines, chatter. The steady rhythm of distraction fills every corner of our waking hours. The modern mind rarely encounters a moment of quiet. If silence arises, it feels almost threatening, like standing too close to the edge of a vast, unseen depth. It isn't that we've become weaker, it's that our nervous systems have adapted to constant reward. Every scroll, ping, and flicker of novelty triggers a tiny burst of dopamine, the brain's way of whispering more. Over time, the baseline shifts. We need constant input just to feel normal. Without it, our bodies interpret stillness as withdrawal. That's why the initial moments without stimulation feel unbearable. The brain, deprived of its usual noise, releases cortisol, a stress response. The silence we seek becomes a pressure we cannot endure. We reach for our phones not to connect, but to escape the weight of our own awareness. But Kierkegaard sensed something hidden within that discomfort. He described boredom as the root of all evil, yet beneath that warning lies a peculiar truth. Boredom is not the lack of meaning, but the sign that meaning is waiting to be uncovered. It's the mind's quiet protest against life that is too noisy and too shallow. When we escape boredom, we aren't avoiding emptiness. We're avoiding confrontation with ourselves, with time, with the vast interior spaces that modern life has taught us to fear. When stimulation decreases, the mind doesn't shut down, it awakens. In quiet moments when there's nothing to do, something extraordinary begins to happen inside the brain. The networks that usually process external information go dark, and a hidden circuit flickers into life, the default mode network. This system connects memory, imagination, and self-awareness, the fundamental structure of consciousness. It becomes active when we daydream, plan, or contemplate who we are and what we aim to become. It functions as the biological stage where the mind investigates its most profound questions. Yet most of us never allow it to unfold fully. We break its flow every few seconds with novelty, and in doing so we hinder our own capacity to make sense of life. Without these quiet stretches, thoughts stay fragmented, unconnected. We keep gathering experiences, but they never come together into meaning. Neuroscientist James Dunkert describes boredom as a signal of unmet potential. It is the mind's way of indicating you could be engaging in something more true to who you are. When we ignore that signal, the system becomes overwhelmed with restlessness. However, when we listen, when we tolerate the uncomfortable stillness, the brain begins to organize itself. Cortisol levels decrease, attention adjusts, and creative connections start to flourish. Stillness is not idleness, it's maintenance. The brain's way of pruning noise and nurturing insight. It enables a scientist to connect ideas across years of data, or an artist to see patterns in chaos. What seems like nothing happening may in fact be everything happening beneath the surface, beyond the noise. Science clarifies the effects of boredom on the brain. Philosophy unveils what it does to the soul. For Nietzsche, boredom was not a trivial inconvenience, it was a test. He believed that when the world becomes silent and pleasure diminishes, we are compelled to face the truth that our values, desires, and distractions were never truly ours. Boredom, he said, is the pause before creation, the silence that demands we forge new meaning or succumb to nihilism. Kierkegaard perceived it differently, yet with equal seriousness. For him, boredom was not just apathy, it was a reflection revealing the unbearable sameness of existence. When everything feels monotonous, he wrote, the soul begins to yearn for transcendence. That yearning is spiritual, a signal that the self has become too confined within its habit. Boredom, then, becomes the initial tremor of awakening, the evidence that something within us still seeks a fuller life. And then comes Heidegger, who explored boredom to its deepest extent. He called it a fundamental mood, one that removes the world's illusions. In moments of intense boredom, he argued, time itself slows down and becomes denser. The ordinary feels unfamiliar, everything loses its apparent meaning, and we see existence in its raw form, bare, unembellished, terrifyingly silent. Most people never stay long enough in that silence to notice what follows: clarity. When the scaffolding of distraction collapses, being itself begins to reveal its contours. Boredom becomes not a void, but a threshold, the crossing between unconscious existence and conscious life. To endure boredom without fleeing it is to experience what Nietzsche called excellent health, the ability to sit with nothing and still feel the pulse of life within. It's in that stillness that a new kind of freedom begins. Not the freedom to escape the world, but to see it again with clear eyes. The tragedy of modern life is not that we are bored, but that we have lost the ability to recognize it. Distraction has become so constant and pervasive that we mistake overstimulation for engagement. Screens, alerts, advertisements, and endless noise take up every spare moment. Yet behind this saturation lies a hidden drought, the absence of genuine depth. Dopamine, the same molecule that fuels curiosity and motivation, is now caught in a feedback loop of micro rewards. Every scroll offers a flicker of pleasure, every click a promise of meaning. Yet, the more we pursue it, the less we feel. The baseline dulls. We crave intensity, but what we truly experience is dulling, a gradual erosion of our sensitivity to beauty, silence, and awe. Cortisol, the stress hormone, increases in response to this chaos. The brain, flooded with new information, never fully processes anything. Thoughts fragment. Memory becomes fleeting. Even joy turns thin, experienced but not truly felt. Nietzsche warned of this fatigue from abundance. When everything is accessible, nothing holds significance. Kierkegaard also saw distraction as despair, masked as busyness. The frantic effort to avoid the question of meaning by filling time with movement. This is the hidden danger of the attention economy. Not that it steals our focus, but that it erodes the very capacity for reflection. The mind, deprived of stillness, becomes a surface where nothing takes root. And so we become restless ghosts, haunting our own lives, endlessly scrolling, endlessly consuming, never reaching. The algorithm feeds us novelty, but what it takes in return is the depth through which novelty once became wonder. Distraction doesn't save us from boredom, it makes it worse. It leaves us stuck between fatigue and hunger, a steady, mild ache for something real. But the remedy we seek can't be found in movement. It lurks in the stillness we've learned to fear. To mend our relationship with boredom, we must first unlearn our fear of it. Stillness isn't punishment, it's practice. The mind must be retrained to endure silence, to sit through the first wave of restlessness without reaching for relief. Because if we can outlast that initial discomfort, something changes. The brain begins to rebalance. Dopamine levels stabilize, cortisol recedes, and the default mode network awakens. Thoughts, once scattered, start to organize themselves. The longer we resist the impulse to escape, the deeper the mind descends into association, reflection, creation. This is why many discoveries occur in stillness. The writer gazing at a blank page. The scientist was pacing the same corridor. The monk reciting the same prayer. Boredom, endured with patience, becomes incubation. It's where intuition forms and ideas emerge. Philosophically, this act of dwelling holds an even greater significance. Nietzsche believed that endurance itself was creative, that strength is not about moving faster, but about standing firm while the world shifts around you. Kierkegaard called it the leap of faith, not towards certainty, but towards presence, towards the unknown that emerges when meaning collapses. To dwell in boredom is to resist the gravitational pull of distraction, to reject the quick fix and face the slow unfolding of the self. It's a rebellion against the culture of immediacy, a reclamation of time. When boredom becomes tolerable, it shifts into attention, and attention turns into curiosity, the very fuel of creativity. The mind starts to ask again, what could I create here? What could I imagine with this silence? In that moment, boredom ceases to be a void. It becomes a workshop, a quiet laboratory for the soul. In every culture, those seeking wisdom begin with retreat. The monk in the desert, the poet in the cabin, the philosopher walking alone through empty streets. They weren't escaping the world. They were listening for the quiet rhythms beneath it. Boredom, at its deepest level, is not a void to escape, but an energy to harness. It's the raw pulse of life before it takes shape. The same restlessness that fuels despair can also fuel creation, if we learn to channel it rather than suppress it. When distractions fade away, a question remains. What is worth my attention? The mind, free of noise, begins to seek substance. This is how meaning begins, not as a revelation, but as a construction. We build it plank by plank, thought by thought, from what boredom leaves behind. Nietzsche described this as the will to power, not domination, but transformation, the ability to turn the pain of emptiness into a force for renewal. Kierkegaard would call it faith, the courage to act without certainty, to leap into purpose even when the world seems hollow. Both recognized that boredom is a summons. It demands engagement in creating meaning. Stillness becomes sacred when it transforms into creation. When the musician remains silent until the first note emerges. When the painter gazes at the blank canvas, the image begins to breathe. When an ordinary person, caught up in the routines of daily life, chooses to build something, a project, a relationship, a new way of being, rather than waiting for a distraction to rescue them. Purpose doesn't seem fully formed. It develops in the soil of attention nourished by the silence that boredom provides. What starts as emptiness ends as becoming. Silence has become one of the rarest luxuries in the modern world. We consider it as absent, the space between what matters, yet every wisdom tradition understands it as the origin of all meaning. The desert, the temple, the forest hermitage, these were never escapes, but laboratories of consciousness. They taught a simple truth, that stillness doesn't erase life, it reveals it. When we cease fleeing boredom, something subtle occurs. The world starts to breathe again. Colours sharpen, sounds deepen, time expands. What once seemed empty begins to shimmer with detail. The silence that once frightened us becomes the backdrop against which everything else springs to life. Philosophers like Heidegger would call this authenticity, being in direct contact with existence, without the anesthetic of constant motion. In that contact, even ordinary life regains its texture. The morning light, the sound of footsteps, the rhythm of breath, all become astonishing again, not because they changed, but because we finally did. Embracing silence helps us reconnect with the sacred. It reminds us that meaning isn't created, it's sensed, and perception grows clearer as the noise fades. Perhaps the next revolution will not stem from faster technology, but from slower minds, from people willing to embrace stillness and let it teach them how to see. Because in that stillness, something vital returns: curiosity, empathy, awe. The quiet realization that life does not need to entertain us to be extraordinary. When we sit with boredom for long enough, it transforms into something entirely different, a form of listening. A listening so profound that it turns the ordinary into revelation. The question is no longer, how do I escape this silence? But, what is this silence trying to show me? Boredom is not the lack of meaning, it's the silent space where meaning starts. The next time your hand reaches for a distraction, let it pause. Listen. Beneath that restless ache lies the pulse of becoming, the whisper of something waiting to be born. When we cease attempting to escape boredom, we realise it was never emptiness at all. It was an invitation.